I came home early that evening, feeling good for the first time in a while. I had finished a major project at the studio ahead of schedule, so I decided to surprise Eliza with dinner from her favorite restaurant. My hands juggled the takeout bag, keys, and my phone, excited to see the look on her face. She had been tired lately with the pregnancy, and I thought this would cheer her up. We were expecting our first child in just a couple of months, and while things had been stressful, I believed we were moving forward together, ready to start this next chapter of our lives. The house was quiet when I stepped inside, too quiet. At first, I thought Eliza was sleeping, and I tiptoed through the living room, placing the food on the counter. The soft glow of the bedside lamp in our bedroom was visible from the hallway. I smiled. She was probably resting, and I didn't want to wake her too abruptly. But as I got closer, I heard a faint sound, a low murmur that I couldn't quite place. My steps slowed, and a strange feeling gripped my chest, a tension I couldn't explain. The door was cracked open, just enough for me to see into the room, and that's when I saw them. Eliza, tangled in the sheets, with him. The man next to her was half-dressed, his back to me, and I could see Eliza's face. Her eyes were closed, her lips parted, unaware of my presence. For a moment, I couldn't move. It was like time had frozen, and all I could do was stand there, watching as the truth of what was happening slowly sank in. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound of blood rushing in my ears, drowning out every rational thought. I wanted to yell, to scream, to throw something, but I couldn't make a sound. My throat was tight, and I felt like I was choking on the disbelief, the betrayal. "Eliza?" I finally managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper, but loud enough to break the quiet. Her eyes snapped open, wide with shock, and in an instant, she scrambled to sit up, yanking the sheets around her. The man beside her, he turned, and I recognized him, though my mind didn't fully register it in that moment. I didn't care about him. I only saw her. "Dominic," Eliza gasped, her voice trembling. "I can explain." "Explain?" I repeated, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and hurt that I could barely control. "You're going to explain this?" I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. I turned away. The image of them together burned into my mind, searing like a brand. I heard the man hurriedly dressing behind me, the rustle of fabric and the clumsy sound of footsteps as he scrambled to leave. "Dominic, wait!" Eliza's voice was desperate now, pleading. I kept walking. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear any excuses, any lies she had prepared to justify what I had just seen. My mind was racing, thoughts crashing into each other as I tried to make sense of it all. Eliza, the woman I had planned to spend the rest of my life with, the mother of my child, had betrayed me. I felt sick, physically sick, like I was going to throw up right there in the hallway. How could she? How could she do this to us? But I couldn't leave. I couldn't storm out and pretend this wasn't happening, even though every fiber of my being wanted to. I had to know why. I had to understand, because without some kind of explanation, I didn't know how I could move forward. I stopped at the door, my hand gripping the frame so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Tell me," I said, my voice low, barely controlled. "Tell me why." Eliza had gotten out of bed by now, wrapping a robe around herself as she moved toward me, her steps hesitant, like she wasn't sure if I would lash out or break down. She stood a few feet away, her face pale, tears forming in her eyes. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice trembling. "Dominic, please, just listen to me. It was a mistake, I swear. I didn't want this to happen." I looked at her, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and sadness. "A mistake? You didn't want this to happen? Eliza, I saw you. You can't lie to me about what I just saw." She shook her head, wiping away a tear. "No, I mean, it was a mistake to trust him. I didn't know who he really was, Dominic. I thought he was a friend." "A friend?" I scoffed. The disbelief in my voice was palpable. "That was a friend? You slept with him, Eliza. You slept with him in our bed." Her hands trembled as she wiped more tears away, her voice cracking as she tried to explain. "It wasn't like that. I didn't plan for this. He manipulated me. He pretended to be someone I could trust. I didn't realize until it was too late." I stared at her, my mind reeling. I wanted to believe her, to believe that this wasn't just another affair, that there was more to the story. But how could I? How could I believe anything she said after what I had just seen? "Who is he?" I demanded, my voice cold, detached. I didn't care about the details. I just needed to know who had done this, who had destroyed everything. Eliza hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor as if she couldn't bear to look at me. "His name is Victor," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Victor. I knew that name. I knew him. An old rival from my music days, someone I had long since left behind when my career fizzled out. We had competed fiercely back in the day, both trying to make a name for ourselves in the same industry. But while I had let go of that rivalry years ago, apparently, Victor hadn't. "Victor?" I repeated, my voice incredulous. "As in Victor? Victor, the same guy who tried to ruin my career?" Eliza nodded, biting her lip. "I didn't know, Dominic. I didn't know who he was at first. I met him a few months ago when I was trying to plan your surprise birthday party. He was so charming, so kind. He said he wanted to help, that he knew people in the industry who could help you get back into the music scene. I thought he was a friend." My head spun as the pieces of the puzzle started to come together. Victor had wormed his way into her life, pretending to be a helpful friend, all the while planning to use her to get back at me. It wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated attack. He wanted to destroy me, and he had found the perfect way to do it. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. The rage I felt earlier was nothing compared to the fury boiling inside me now. Victor had manipulated Eliza, had used her to get to me, and worst of all, it had worked. "I'm so sorry, Dominic," Eliza whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't see it coming. I didn't know what he was doing until it was too late. I never wanted to hurt you." I turned to face her fully, my eyes burning with the intensity of everything I felt. "You should have told me," I said, my voice harsh. "You should have come to me the second you felt something was wrong. But instead, you let him into our lives. You let him ruin everything." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I know I made a mistake. I was stupid, I was blind. But please, Dominic, please don't leave me. We can fix this. We can still be a family." A family. The word felt hollow now. How could we ever be a family after this? How could I ever trust her again? I stepped back, shaking my head. "I don't know, Eliza. I don't know if I can ever forgive this." She reached out to me, but I stepped further away, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. I couldn't stay here. I needed to think, to clear my head. Without another word, I turned and walked out the door, leaving her sobbing behind me. As I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Victor had won, hadn't he? He had done exactly what he set out to do. He had ruined my relationship, my family. But I couldn't let him have that victory. No, I wouldn't let him win, not like this. I drove through the night, my mind spinning with a storm of thoughts that I couldn't control. Eliza's sobs still echoed in my ears, but all I could think about was Victor. He had done this. He had wormed his way into her life, into our life, just to destroy everything I had built. I hadn't thought about him in years. After my music career had stalled, I figured I had left that part of my life behind. The rivalries, the backstabbing competition. But clearly, Victor hadn't. I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, the anger building up in my chest like a fire I couldn't put out. I had to know more. I had to know exactly how long this had been going on, how deep his plan ran, and what he was really after. The next day, I decided to start my investigation. I couldn't stay at home, not with Eliza there. I wasn't ready to face her again. So I called up a few old contacts from my music days. Some were reluctant to talk, others were eager to gossip. The stories about Victor were the same as always. He was a snake, always looking for an angle, always trying to sabotage people who got in his way. But none of them had heard anything about him recently. He had kept a low profile over the last few years, which only made me more suspicious. If Victor had been planning this for a while, he wouldn't have broadcasted it. He would have worked behind the scenes, laying the groundwork for his revenge without anyone noticing. I didn't want to involve anyone else in this, but I needed more information. So, I did the one thing I never thought I'd do again. I reached out to an old bandmate, Greg. He had stayed in the industry longer than I did, and he knew people. He wasn't exactly my favorite person in the world after our falling out, but he might know something about Victor. Greg answered after a few rings, his voice surprised but not entirely unfriendly. Dominic? Wow, man, long time no see. What's up? I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I need to know if you've heard anything about Victor. Victor Fiennes. Have you been in touch with him? There was a pause on the other end. Victor? Why the hell would you want to know about him? Last I heard, he was still nursing a grudge over the whole record deal fiasco. You know, the one where he thought you stole his spotlight. Yeah, I know, I said, gritting my teeth. I need to know if he's been up to anything recently. Anything that might explain why he's come back into my life. Greg hesitated. Man, I don't know. I haven't heard much about him lately, but I can ask around. Is this personal? I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, you could say that. After hanging up, I felt a small spark of hope. If Greg could dig something up, it might give me a better idea of how to handle this. But until then, I needed answers from the one person who could give them to me, Eliza. As much as I wanted to avoid her, I couldn't ignore the fact that she was the key to understanding how this whole thing had started. I returned to the house that afternoon, bracing myself for another confrontation. Eliza was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She didn't say anything as I sat down across from her. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I need you to tell me everything, I said finally, my voice cold but steady. How did this happen? How did Victor get to you? Eliza wiped her eyes, her hands trembling. I told you, it started when I was planning your birthday surprise. I didn't know who he was. He introduced himself as someone who used to work in the music industry, said he knew people who could help you get back into it. I thought it was a sign, that maybe it was a way to get you back to doing what you loved. I didn't realize he was using me. How did it go from that to what I saw? I asked, my voice sharp. Don't leave anything out, Eliza. I need to know. She took a deep breath, clearly struggling to find the words. At first, it was just friendly. He seemed so helpful, always asking about you, giving me advice on how to support your career. But then, little by little, he started saying things, planting doubts. He made me feel like maybe I wasn't enough for you, that you were unhappy with me. He said you were stuck, that you resented me for not pushing you harder to go back to music. And I believed him. I clenched my fists under the table, anger surging through me. You believed him? You believed some guy you barely knew over me? Your boyfriend? The father of your child? Eliza looked down at her hands, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't want to believe it, but he was so convincing. He made it seem like you were pulling away from me, like I was losing you. And then one night, after we'd been drinking, I made a mistake. A mistake, I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that what you call it? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean for it to happen. And after that, I wanted to tell you, but I was so scared. I didn't know how to fix it. And then Victor, he wouldn't let it go. He kept reminding me of what I'd done, using it to keep me under his control. So, this wasn't just a one-time thing, I said, my voice growing colder. He blackmailed you. Eliza nodded, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Yes, I was trapped, Dominic. I didn't know what to do. I was terrified that if you found out you'd leave me, and now I've ruined everything. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Victor had set this up from the beginning. He had preyed on Eliza's insecurities, manipulated her into thinking I didn't care about her anymore, and then used that to destroy our relationship. He had won, but I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I need time to think, I said, standing up from the table. I don't know if I can forgive you, Eliza. I don't know if we can fix this, but I'm not going to let Victor win. As I walked out of the room, I heard Eliza's soft sobs behind me, but I didn't stop. I had too much to figure out, too much at stake. I wasn't just fighting for our relationship anymore. I was fighting for my future, for my child's future, and I wasn't going to let Victor take that away from me. The next few days were a blur. Greg got back to me with some information. Nothing too surprising. Victor had been laying low, biding his time. But what Greg did tell me was that Victor had recently been talking about a big score. Apparently, he had been bragging to a few industry insiders about finally getting his revenge on someone who had wronged him years ago. That someone was obviously me. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just sit back and let Victor control my life from the shadows. I had to confront him, face to face. This wasn't just about Eliza anymore. This was about taking back control of my life, of my career, of my family. Victor had already taken so much from me. I wasn't going to let him take any more. I tracked him down easily enough. He was playing a gig at a small club downtown, one of those places that used to mean something back in the day but had long since lost its shine. Perfect for someone like Victor, still clinging to his old grudges, trying to relive the glory days. As I walked into the club, the sound of his music washed over me, loud and brash, but lacking the soul it used to have. Victor had always been talented, but now his music felt empty, like he was just going through the motions. I pushed through the crowd, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew I had to say something. When the set ended, I made my way backstage, slipping past security with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. Victor was there, basking in the glow of his small victory, surrounded by a few groupies who didn't seem to care that his star had long since faded. He saw me before I could speak, and a slow, smug smile spread across his face. "Dominic," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Come to congratulate me on finally winning?" I clenched my fists, resisting the urge to punch him right then and there. "This isn't a game, Victor. You crossed a line and you know it." Victor chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, come on. Don't be so dramatic. You knew this was coming. You knew I'd never let you get away with what you did to me." "I didn't do anything to you," I snapped. "You destroyed yourself, and now you're trying to take me down with you." He leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, that smug grin still plastered across his face. I wanted to wipe it off with my fist. "You didn't do anything to me?" Victor scoffed, shaking his head. "You really believe that, don't you? Like you were some innocent bystander in your own success. Do you even remember how you stepped all over me, how you used every connection you had to keep me down?" I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the wave of anger surging through me. "That's all in your head, Victor. You've been holding on to this grudge for years, but I didn't ruin your career. You did. I didn't force you to make bad decisions. I didn't force you to burn bridges. That was all you." He sneered, stepping forward, getting in my face. "That's what you tell yourself, huh? That you're the good guy in all of this? You always played the victim, Dominic, like you didn't know what was going on around you. But you knew. You knew I was struggling, and you did nothing. You were happy to see me fail because it made you feel better about your own pathetic life." I shook my head, taking a step back to keep from lashing out. "This isn't about the past anymore, Victor. This is about now. You didn't just come after me. You went after Eliza. You used her, manipulated her, and for what? To get back at me? To prove some point? You crossed the line when you dragged her into this." Victor's grin widened, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "Oh, Eliza, she was easier to play than I thought. You know, for someone who claims to love you, she fell for my act pretty quickly. Guess she was just waiting for someone to show her what she was missing." The fury I had been trying to contain broke free. I lunged at him, grabbing him by the collar and shoving him against the wall. "Don't talk about her like that," I snarled, my face inches from his. "You don't get to use her to hurt me, and then laugh about it." Victor laughed anyway, even as I pinned him against the wall. "That's it, Dominic. That's what I've been waiting for. The old you, the one who'd do anything to protect what's his. But it's too late, man. You've already lost. You're just a shell of who you used to be." I let go of him, stepping back, disgusted by the whole thing, by him, by myself, for letting it get this far. I couldn't let him drag me down to his level. "You think you've won because you managed to wreck my life? Because you got Eliza to make a mistake? You're wrong. I'm not going to let you destroy me, Victor. Not this time." Victor straightened his shirt, still grinning, but I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. "What are you going to do, Dominic? Fight for her? You really think she'll stick around after everything that's happened? Once a cheater, always a cheater. You can't trust her, and deep down, you know it." His words hit me hard, but I didn't let him see the effect they had. He wanted me to doubt her, to doubt myself. He wanted me to walk away, to let the guilt and pain eat me alive. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. "This isn't about trust," I said, my voice steady now. "It's about taking back control of my life. You've spent years holding on to this grudge, And for what? You're still playing in these rundown clubs while the world moves on without you. You're stuck in the past, Victor, and I refuse to be stuck there with you. Victor's grin faltered, his eyes narrowing as the truth hit him. He wanted me to be as miserable as he was, but I wasn't going to give in to that darkness. I had more to fight for. Eliza, my child, my future. I wasn't going to let him take that away from me. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, stunned. I could feel his eyes burning into my back, but I didn't look back. He didn't matter anymore. What mattered was figuring out how to fix the mess he had made, how to rebuild what was left of my life. When I got back home, Eliza was waiting for me. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure if I would stay or walk out again. I couldn't blame her. I had been avoiding her for days, too wrapped up in my anger and my need for revenge. But standing in front of her now, I realized that none of that mattered. I could either let Victor win by walking away, or I could fight for what we had left. "We need to talk," I said, my voice softer than it had been the last time we spoke. Eliza nodded, her eyes full of hope but also fear. We sat down at the kitchen table, the same place where everything had started to fall apart. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. I saw Victor. I confronted him. Eliza's eyes widened, but she stayed quiet, waiting for me to continue. "He admitted it. Everything. He used you to get to me. He planned the whole thing. But that doesn't change what happened between us. I still don't know how to move past that." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached for my hand, but I pulled back, not ready for that kind of closeness yet. "Dominic, I know I can't undo what I did, but I swear to you, it meant nothing. I was stupid, I was vulnerable, and I let him manipulate me. But I never stopped loving you." Her words were sincere, but trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. "It's not just about what happened, Eliza. It's about what it did to us. I don't know if I can ever trust you the same way again. I don't know if we can go back to what we had." She looked down, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I understand that. I know I broke something between us, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm committed to this, to us, to our family." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could fix what had been broken, but the doubt still lingered. I don't know if I can just move on from this. I don't even know where to start. Eliza wiped her eyes, her voice trembling as she spoke. "We can start by trying. We can go to counseling. We can talk about what happened, and we can figure out how to rebuild the trust we lost. I know it won't be easy, but I don't want to lose you, Dominic. I don't want our child to grow up without both of us in their life." Her words hit me hard. I had been so focused on my own pain that I hadn't thought about the bigger picture, our child. This wasn't just about me or Eliza anymore. We had a family to think about, a future to protect. Walking away would mean giving up on that, and I wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. "I'm not making any promises," I said slowly, my voice filled with the weight of everything we had been through. "But I'm willing to try. For our child. For us." Eliza nodded, relief flooding her face. "That's all I'm asking for. Just a chance." We sat in silence for a while, the tension between us still thick but less oppressive than before. There was no quick fix for what had happened, no easy way to erase the pain and betrayal. But maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward. The next few weeks were tough. We started counseling, and it wasn't easy to sit there and talk about the affair, to dig into the reasons why it happened. But it was necessary. I needed to understand how we had gotten to this point, and Eliza needed to take responsibility for her actions. It wasn't just about fixing our relationship. It was about healing from the wounds that had been inflicted. Through it all, I found myself turning back to music. It had always been my escape, my way of processing the world, and now, more than ever, I needed that outlet. I started writing again, pouring my pain, my anger, my confusion into lyrics and melodies. It wasn't about trying to revive my old career. It was about finding a way to express everything I was feeling. Surprisingly, people started to take notice. The raw emotion in my new songs struck a chord with listeners, and before I knew it, I was getting offers to play gigs again. Small ones at first, but it was something. Music had always been a part of me, and now it was helping me find a way back to myself. But just when things seemed to be getting better, Victor struck again. The first sign was a phone call from my manager, asking if I had seen the latest headlines. Confused, I pulled up my phone, and there it was. My name plastered across gossip sites, tabloids running stories about Eliza's affair. Victor had leaked everything to the press. The intimate details, the betrayal, the scandal. He had found another way to tear me down, and this time, it wasn't just my personal life that was under attack. It was my name was plastered all over the headlines. It was surreal seeing my private life turned into public gossip. Music comeback ruined by scandal. Dominic and Eliza's affair exposed. Every disgusting detail Victor had gotten his hands on was out there, tainting whatever small progress I had made. I stared at my phone, the words burning into my brain. I felt sick. I couldn't believe Victor had stooped this low, but deep down, I knew I shouldn't have been surprised. He had nothing left to lose. Eliza found me in the living room, my phone clenched in my hand, my mind numb. She could tell something was wrong the moment she stepped in. "Dominic?" she said hesitantly, her voice shaky. "What happened?" I handed her my phone without a word, and she gasped when she saw the headlines. Her hand flew to her mouth as she scrolled through the article. "Oh my God," she whispered, tears already forming in her eyes. How did they know all of this?" I couldn't speak. The anger was so overwhelming that I felt like I might explode if I opened my mouth. Eliza sank onto the couch, staring at the screen in horror. This is everything, every detail. How did he—" Her voice trailed off, realization dawning on her face. "It was Victor, wasn't it? He did this." I didn't have to answer. She already knew. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I can't believe he would do this. I didn't think he'd go this far." I stood up, pacing the room, trying to contain the rage boiling inside me. "You didn't think?" I said, my voice harsher than I intended. "You didn't think when you let him into our lives. You didn't think when you slept with him. And now look at where we are." Eliza flinched at my words, fresh tears rolling down her cheeks. "I know," she whispered. "I know I made mistakes, Dominic, but I never thought he'd do something like this. I didn't know he was this evil." "Evil?" I laughed bitterly. "He's been like this for years. You just didn't see it because you didn't know him like I did. But now he's not just trying to ruin me, he's ruining us." Eliza cried harder, but I couldn't comfort her. I was too filled with rage, too focused on what Victor had done. He had taken something deeply personal and turned it into a spectacle for the world to consume. My reputation, my career, my relationship, it was all under attack, and I had no idea how to stop it. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and damage control. My manager tried to reassure me that the scandal would blow over, that people had short attention spans and would forget about it in a week. But I knew better. In the music industry, especially for someone trying to make a comeback, scandals like this didn't just disappear. They stuck to you like tar, dragging down everything you tried to rebuild. The press hounded us. Paparazzi camped outside our house, waiting to snap pictures of us in our worst moments. I couldn't go anywhere without seeing my face on magazine covers, without hearing people whisper about the affair, about what kind of man I must be to deserve what had happened. It was infuriating, humiliating, and worst of all, it felt like there was nothing I could do to fix it. Eliza tried to stay strong, but I could see the guilt and shame eating away at her. She barely left the house, afraid of running into someone who had read the gossip. And as much as I wanted to blame Victor for everything, I couldn't help but feel the sting of her betrayal all over again. The scandal had ripped open the wound that was just starting to heal, and now I was drowning in it. But amidst all the chaos, I kept thinking about our child. Eliza was still pregnant, and as much as I wanted to rage and break everything in sight, I knew I couldn't afford to lose sight of what really mattered. We were going to be parents soon, and I had to be there for my child. I couldn't let Victor win by letting this destroy us completely. That's what kept me going. I focused on the baby, on the future we were supposed to have, even if everything around me was falling apart. I had to find a way to rise above this, not just for myself, but for my family. No matter how much pain I was in, I knew I had to fight for them. One day, while Eliza and I were sitting in the kitchen, trying to pretend like things were normal, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Greg. "We need to talk." I have news about Victor. My stomach tightened. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what else Victor had planned, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore it. I have to meet someone, I said to Eliza, standing up. She looked up at me with wide eyes, as if she was afraid I was leaving for good. Dominic, she said softly, her voice full of uncertainty. Are you okay? I hesitated, looking down at her. She was fragile, broken by everything that had happened, and as much as I wanted to keep my distance from her, I couldn't deny that I still cared about her. I don't know, I admitted, my voice quiet, but I'm trying. That seemed to ease her worry, and she nodded, not pushing me for more. I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door, my mind spinning as I made my way to meet Greg. Whatever news he had, it couldn't be good, but I needed to hear it. I needed to know what else Victor was planning. We met at a small cafe, far away from the prying eyes of the press. Greg was already sitting at a table when I arrived, his face grim. Dominic, he said as I sat down. I don't know how to say this, so I'll just be blunt. Victor's been talking to people. He's planning something big. I don't have all the details, but from what I've heard, he's trying to ruin you financially. He's been digging into your contracts, your business deals, anything he can find that'll give him leverage. I stared at him, my stomach churning with dread. Financially, why? He already ruined my reputation. What more could he want? Greg shook his head. Revenge isn't enough for Victor. He wants to destroy you completely. He's been trying to find a way to sabotage your comeback, make sure you never get back on your feet, and if he can't do it through scandal, he'll do it through your bank account. I clenched my fists, the anger I had been trying to suppress rising to the surface again. This has to stop, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I can't keep playing his game. He's gone too far. Greg nodded. I get it, man, but you need to be smart about this. If you go after him head on, he'll just use it against you. You need to be careful. Careful. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. I didn't want to be careful. I wanted to fight back, to make Victor pay for everything he had done. But I knew Greg was right. Victor had already shown that he wasn't afraid to use any means necessary to bring me down, and if I wasn't careful, I'd be walking right into his trap. I left the cafe with a heavy heart, my mind racing with possibilities. Victor was still out there, still plotting, still determined to ruin me, and now he was going after my finances, my livelihood. I couldn't let that happen. I had to find a way to stop him, to protect what little I had left. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than just me. Victor wasn't just attacking me. He was attacking everything I stood for, everything I had worked for. And if I didn't find a way to stop him soon, I might lose everything. When I got home, Eliza was waiting for me in the living room, her face filled with worry. "What's going on?" she asked softly, sensing my tension. "Did something happen?" I sighed, sitting down beside her. "Victor's not done. He's coming after my money now. He wants to destroy me completely." Eliza's eyes widened in shock. "What? But how? Why?" "Because he's obsessed," I said bitterly. "He's been holding on to this grudge for years, and he's not going to stop until he's completely ruined me." She looked down, tears filling her eyes again. "This is all my fault," she whispered. "If I hadn't let him into our lives—" "No," I said firmly, cutting her off. "This isn't just about you. Victor's been planning this for a long time. You made a mistake, but this isn't your fault. This is about him, about his need for revenge. We can't let him win." Eliza looked up at me, her eyes filled with hope. "What do we do?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let Victor take everything from me. I wasn't going to let Victor take everything from me. That thought replayed in my mind as I sat in silence with Eliza. I didn't have a plan. Not yet. But I knew I had to fight back. He had pushed me too far, and now it was time for me to stop reacting and start acting. The next few days were tense. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach twisted, expecting another piece of bad news. Financially, things were already strained. The scandal had affected my gigs, and the media attention was making it hard to book anything solid. Even my old contacts were hesitant to get involved with me now, thanks to Victor's smear campaign. But I refused to crumble under the pressure. If Victor thought he could finish me off with this, he was wrong. Eliza and I were on thin ice, emotionally. We were still going to counseling, still talking, but trust was a fragile thing. As much as I wanted to believe we could rebuild, there were moments when I felt the weight of her betrayal like a physical ache. The worst part was that I knew she felt it too. This heavy, unspoken thing between us that no amount of apologies or promises could erase. One evening, I found myself alone in the studio, staring at the blank pages of my notebook. Music used to be my escape, my way of working through the worst of what life threw at me, but now even that felt tainted. Every time I picked up the guitar, I thought about the songs I'd written for Eliza, about how she used to be my muse. Now, she was just a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I tossed the notebook aside in frustration, running a hand through my hair. What was I even doing? Everything felt like it was slipping through my fingers. A knock at the door interrupted my spiral of thoughts. It was Greg. I'd been avoiding him since our last conversation, not ready to face the reality of Victor's new attack on my life. But there he was, standing in the doorway, looking as serious as I felt. "Hey man," he said, stepping inside. "I know it's a bad time, but we need to talk." I nodded, not really in the mood, but knowing I didn't have much of a choice. "Yeah, come in." Greg sat down across from me, his expression grim. "I've been hearing more about what Victor's been up to. He's not just going after your finances. He's trying to ruin you on a deeper level. He's been talking to some of the big names in the industry, people with real influence, trying to get them to blacklist you." My heart sank. Blacklist me? For what? For being unreliable, for being bad for business because of the scandal, Greg said, sighing. "Look, I know this isn't what you want to hear, but he's got people's ears. And with the way things are now, it's easy for them to just push you out of the industry quietly." I felt the anger rise in my chest again, a familiar burn that I couldn't seem to shake anymore. "So what? I just sit here and watch my entire life fall apart while Victor gets to destroy everything?" "No," Greg said firmly. "You don't sit here and do nothing, but you need to be smart about how you fight back. You can't just react to everything he's doing. You need to get ahead of him." "How?" I asked, my voice sharp. "How do I fight back against someone who's already taken everything from me?" Greg leaned forward, his voice lowering as if he was about to share a secret. "I've been thinking about this. You need to get in front of the narrative. The media, the industry, they're all feeding off the scandal because they don't know the real story. But you do. You need to take control of it." I frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean?" "You need to tell your side, Dominic. You need to be the one to break the story, not just react to what's already out there. You have a platform. You have a fan base, even if it's been damaged by all this. Use that. Be honest, be raw. Tell the world what really happened, not just what Victor's spinning." The idea sounded crazy at first. Me? Go public with all the messy details? It felt too personal, too vulnerable. But as Greg kept talking, I realized he was right. If I kept letting Victor control the narrative, I was going to lose everything. But if I took control, if I told the truth, maybe I could salvage something. Maybe I could stop him from winning. I sat there for a long time after Greg left, thinking about what he said. Could I really do it? Could I put everything out there for the world to see? It was terrifying, the thought of exposing myself like that. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't have a choice. Victor had already dragged my life through the mud. I needed to take back control before there was nothing left to save. That night, I sat down in front of my computer and started writing. I wrote about my career, about how things had gone wrong, about the rivalry with Victor that had simmered beneath the surface for years. I wrote about Eliza, about our relationship, about how we'd both made mistakes. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I couldn't afford to. If I was going to do this, I had to be honest, brutally honest, about everything. When I was done, I read over what I'd written. It was raw, painful, and ugly in places, but it was the truth. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had something real to hold on to. I wasn't just reacting to Victor anymore. I was taking back control of the story. I sent the piece to Greg, asking him to review it before I made it public. His response was immediate. "This is it. This is what you need to do." With his support, I published the story online. I knew it was risky. I knew there was a chance it would backfire, that people wouldn't care, that they'd still see me as the guy who got caught up in a scandal. But I also knew that if I didn't take this step, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, my phone was buzzing with messages, notifications pouring in from social media, emails from people who had read my story. Some were supportive, some were angry, but the one thing they all had in common was that they were listening. For the first time since this nightmare started, people were hearing my side. It didn't take long for the media to pick up on it. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about the scandal. It was about my rivalry with Victor, about how he had orchestrated the whole thing, about how I was fighting back. The narrative was shifting, and I could feel the tide turning in my favor. Eliza was relieved, too. For the first time in weeks, she seemed to have some hope. "Maybe now we can move on," she said one night as we sat together, exhausted from the whirlwind of everything that had happened. "Maybe," I agreed, though I wasn't entirely convinced. This wasn't over yet. Victor wasn't going to go down without a fight, and I knew he wouldn't take kindly to me telling the world about what he had done. Sure enough, a few days later, I got a message from Greg. "Victor's pissed. He's not backing down." I wasn't surprised. I had expected him to retaliate, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had come too far to let him intimidate me now. "Let him come," I told Greg. "I'm not running anymore." And I meant it. Victor might have thought he could destroy me, but I wasn't going to give him that power. I had my story, I had the truth, and most importantly, I had something to fight for: my family, my future, my music. Victor had already taken so much from me, but I wasn't going to let him take any more. As I sat down with Eliza that night, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. We weren't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were moving in the right direction. There was still so much to figure out, so much to rebuild, but we were in this together, and that was enough to keep me going. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't just reacting to the chaos anymore, I was actively shaping my future. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure: I was done letting Victor control my life. This was my story, and I was finally ready to tell it on my own terms. And I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction wash over me. Victor had tried to destroy my life, and now he was facing the consequences of his actions. But even as I celebrated the victory, a knot of anxiety twisted in my stomach. I knew Victor wouldn't go down without a fight. He was still dangerous, still capable of lashing out. I couldn't let my guard down, not yet. Eliza and I watched the news coverage together that night. I had invited her to join me, hoping we could share a moment of relief after everything that had happened. But as the newscasters talked about Victor's fall from grace, I could see the worry in her eyes. "Do you think he'll try to come after us again?" she asked softly. I turned to her, taking her hand in mine. "He might try, but I'm not afraid anymore. I have the truth on my side. We're finally free of him." She nodded, but I could see the doubt lingering behind her eyes. I understood. We had both been living in fear for so long that it was hard to shake off the habit. "We just need to stay strong," I said, trying to reassure her. "Together, we can handle whatever he throws at us." But in the back of my mind, I knew I wasn't entirely convinced of my own words. Victor was still out there, still plotting. I had to remain vigilant, and I had to make sure that Eliza and our child were safe. I couldn't let my guard down, not when we were so close to the finish line. As the days went by, the media frenzy continued. Victor's downfall became a spectacle, and I was thrust back into the spotlight. But this time, it felt different. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a survivor. I had taken back my story, my narrative, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. Yet, amidst all the chaos, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I still needed to confront Victor one last time, to put an end to this for good. I had exposed him, but I needed to make sure he understood that I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I needed him to know that I had won. The moment came sooner than I expected. I received a text from Greg, and my heart sank as I read it. "Victor wants to meet. He says he has something important to discuss." I stared at the message, torn between anger and caution. Victor had been backed into a corner, and I knew he wouldn't ask to meet unless he had something up his sleeve. But I also knew that this was my chance. This could be the confrontation I had been waiting for. I texted Greg back. "Set it up. I want to hear what he has to say." As the day of the meeting approached, I felt a mix of dread and excitement. I had come so far, and now it was time to face my enemy once and for all. I wasn't going to let him control my life any longer. I was ready to end this battle. When the day finally arrived, I found myself pacing in front of the cafe where we were supposed to meet. My heart raced with anticipation. Would this be the closure I needed, or would it just open old wounds? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This was it. This was the moment that would define everything. No more running, no more hiding. I was ready to confront Victor, ready to tell him that I wasn't afraid anymore. As I walked into the cafe, I spotted him sitting at a corner table, looking as smug as ever. He hadn't changed at all. I approached, feeling my heart pound louder with each step. "Dominic," he said, a sly smile on his face as he gestured for me to sit. "I'm glad you could make it." I sat down, forcing myself to remain calm. "What do you want, Victor?" He leaned back in his chair, a look of feigned innocence on his face. "I just wanted to talk. You've been causing quite a stir, haven't you?" I leaned forward, my voice low. "Cut the crap. You know exactly what you've done. I'm not here to play games." Victor chuckled, his demeanor unnerving. "You think you've won, don't you? You think exposing me will keep you safe?" I clenched my fists, the anger boiling beneath the surface. "What are you planning? You're not going to get away with this." He leaned in closer, a dark gleam in his eyes. "You're right. I won't, but you should know that I'm not finished yet. You think this is over? You think you can just walk away from everything I've built? You're mistaken, Dominic." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. This wasn't just a casual meeting. This was a warning, but I wasn't going to back down. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Victor. You can't control me. You've lost." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You think you're in control, but you're not. You may have exposed me, but that only makes you a target now. I've been in this industry long enough to know how it works, and I'll make sure you regret this." I stood up, my heart racing, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Do what you want, Victor. You're the one who's lost everything, not me. I'm done being your pawn." As I turned to leave, I felt his eyes on my back, the weight of his gaze heavy with a promise of revenge. But I didn't look back. I had taken my stand, and I wasn't going to let him intimidate me any longer. As I walked out of the cafe, the tension that had built up inside me began to fade. I had faced him, and I had stood my ground. Whatever he had planned, I would be ready. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of the fight for my life, my family, and my future, and I was more determined than ever to win.